The medical transport ship descended through Valorian's amber atmosphere like a falling star, trailing purple plasma exhaust. Sarah Chen watched the landscape emerge below, towering crystalline structures that caught the light of the system's double sun and scattered it like shattered diamonds across endless metal plains. She had been in space for 3 years now, traveling from colony to colony, station to station, offering her medical expertise wherever humanity had spread across the stars. But this was different. This was the first time she had been invited to an alien civilization on an official diplomatic mission. She didn't feel like a diplomat, though. She felt like a medic who had somehow been dressed up in formal clothing and sent to do a job she wasn't qualified for. The briefing had been simple enough. The Valorian Empire wanted to establish formal relations with humanity. They had sent an ambassador to Earth, a towering creature with crystalline skin and eyes like black opals. Through translation software, the ambassador had requested that humanity send their greatest warriors to meet with the Valorian leadership. It was meant to be a gesture of goodwill and mutual respect. Instead, Earth's government had sent Sarah Chen, a 42-year-old emergency medicine physician from Vancouver, along with a small diplomatic team. Sarah had asked why. The answer had come from a tired diplomat named Marcus, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. They value strength and capability. They want to see what humanity can truly do. Send them warriors and we'll just be another species looking for a fight. Send them someone who can save lives, who can do something no weapon can do. That makes us different. That makes us stand out. Sarah hadn't been convinced, but she had packed her bags anyway. The landing pad rushed up to meet the transport, and the ship touched down with barely a tremor. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the greeting committee. There were at least 50 Valorians waiting, each one standing nearly 8 feet tall, with that distinctive crystalline skin that seemed to glow from within. Their bodies were angular, efficient, built like weapons themselves. They wore armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged, organic-looking material that shifted between shades of blue and silver as they moved. At the center of the group stood one who was different, larger than the others with deeper coloration to her crystalline hide, nearly sapphire blue, and bearing marks across her face that Sarah's briefing materials identified as the traditional tattoos of the Valorian military elite. This was Commander Thassa, the one who had requested the meeting. According to the reports, she was one of the most decorated warriors in the entire Valorian military. She had personally led a dozen successful campaigns against the Krell swarm, an aggressive insectoid species that had been at war with the Valoronians for over 200 years. Sarah took a deep breath, checked that her medical credentials were properly displayed on her chest plate, a simple silver badge that identified her as a certified emergency physician, and walked toward the landing ramp. The cool, recycled air of the ship gave way to the heated atmosphere of Valorian surface. The double sun was intense, and Sarah felt sweat bead on her forehead almost immediately. Commander Thassa's expression didn't change as Sarah approached. If anything, the Valorian's black opal's eyes seemed to register something like disappointment. "You are the warrior they send?" Thassa's voice was like grinding stone, translated through the small device in Sarah's ear. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen," Sarah said, extending her hand. It was a human gesture that had, over the years, become recognized across species as a sign of peaceful greeting. "I'm not a warrior. I'm a physician. I specialize in emergency trauma medicine." The other Valorians seemed to recoil slightly at this announcement. Sarah heard what sounded like disappointed murmurs in their own language, a series of crystalline chiming sounds that the translator couldn't quite pass. The Valorian skin was cool and smooth, with a faint electrical charge that made the hair on Sarah's arm stand on end. "A physician. This is what your civilization sends to demonstrate capability?" "I save lives," Sarah said. She kept her voice steady, even though every instinct was screaming at her that this was a colossal mistake. "That's my specialty. That's what I do better than anyone else I know." Thassa released her hand. "Come. Perhaps you will understand our world better once you see it." The tour of the Valorian Command Center was both impressive and heartbreaking. Sarah was shown the war room first, where holographic displays showed the ongoing conflict with the Krell swarm across a map of local space. The Krell controlled vast territories, their biomechanical ships forming patterns that looked less like military formations and more like the movements of a living organism. The Valorians had lost significant ground in the past 6 months. 2,000 soldiers lost in the last campaign, Thassa said, gesturing at a section of the map that now showed Krell territory. "Another 1,000 wounded." We have limited medical resources. Many of the wounded cannot be saved because we simply do not have enough physicians and equipment. Sarah felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a show of military force. This was a desperate military power showing off how close they were to losing a war. They were taken to the medical facility next. Sarah tried to prepare herself, but nothing could have readied her for what she saw. The ward was overcrowded beyond belief. Valorian soldiers lay on medical beds, their crystalline bodies fractured in some places, their internal luminescence dimming with pain and infection. Some had lost entire limbs. Others had what appeared to be severe burns from plasma weapons. The few medical personnel in the facility looked overwhelmed, moving from bed to bed with the exhausted efficiency of people who had been working without rest for far too long. A young Valorian physician, no older than 30, which Sarah assumed meant something similar about life stage among her species, approached Commander Thassa with a bowed head. "Commander, we have had to make difficult choices. The materials for advanced reconstruction require resources we no longer have. We are losing 3 patients a day to infections we cannot treat." Thassa's facial markings seemed to darken slightly. "This is the reality of our war." She moved into the medical ward, her physician's eyes taking in everything. The infection control practices were primitive by human standards. The antibiotics available were limited and outdated. The surgical equipment was functional but clunky, nothing like the precision instruments available in even a basic human hospital. The pain management options were almost non-existent. Many of the soldiers were conscious and clearly suffering.
"These people don't need warriors,"
Sarah said quietly.
"they need help."
"Now." She turned to the young Valorian physician. "What's your name?" "I am Krell," the physician said, surprise evident in his translated voice. "Krell, I need to show you something," Sarah said. She pulled up the medical database on her portable system, a device smaller than a tablet that contained 30 years of human medical knowledge. "What antibiotics are you using?" Krell showed her the compounds. They were classified medications, ancient by human standards. Sarah pulled up protocols for modern antibiotic treatments, for advanced infection control, for pain management with minimal side effects. She showed him techniques for cleaning wounds that would prevent infection in the first place, methods for treating plasma burns that had been developed by human military medicine in the past decade. "I don't understand," Krell said. "You are showing me these are efficient. But why would you?" "Because I'm a doctor," Sarah said. "It's what I do. People hurt. I help. That's not about strength or weakness. It's about what I can actually do to make things better." For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked. She didn't ask for permission from the diplomats or from Commander Thassa. She simply rolled up her sleeves and started helping. She showed Krell how to properly assess and treat the infections. She worked with the existing medical team to implement better pain management protocols using the equipment available. She personally examined a dozen of the most critical patients, determining which ones could be saved if given the right treatment, and which ones needed comfort care instead of futile interventions. By the time evening fell across Valorian's plains, something had changed. The infection ward was quieter. No screaming, no agonized crystalline chiming. The soldiers who had been conscious and in pain were resting, properly medicated. 3 of the patients Sarah had written off as lost, given to comfort care only, were instead sleeping peacefully, their bodies finally able to relax after days of agony. Commander Thassa watched from the doorway as Sarah showed Krell how to properly insert a central line for medication delivery. "You do this for everyone?" the commander asked. "I do this for whoever needs it," Sarah said without looking up from her work. "That's the entire point of medicine. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, or how strong you are. If you're hurt and I can help, I help." Thassa was silent for a long moment. "The humans," she said finally, "are not what we expected. I'm not a warrior. I'm a medic. But I think you'll find that in a war like yours, against an enemy like the Krell, having someone who can keep your soldiers alive is worth a lot more than another sword arm." Over the following days, Sarah worked herself into a state of complete exhaustion. She trained Krell and his team in everything she could. In the limited time she had, she developed protocols for the med facility based on human best practices, adapted to work with Valorian biology and the available equipment. She performed emergency surgeries on patients who, under the previous system, would have simply been left to die. By the end of her first week on Valorian, she had directly saved 37 lives. But more importantly, she had shown an entire civilization, something they had never truly understood. Strength wasn't just about power and weapons. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was refuse to let people suffer and die when you had the knowledge to save them. When Commander Thassa came to her quarters on the evening of the 8th day, Sarah knew something significant was about to happen. The Valorian commander's crystalline face was unreadable, but her coloration had shifted to a shade of deep purple that Sarah had learned meant serious consideration.
Your civilization sends this, Thassa said, gesturing to Sarah.
A healer, not a warrior. Tell me, Dr. Chen, why did you come to Valorian if not to show your prowess in battle? Sarah set down the data pad she had been working on. Because I was asked to. Because people were suffering. Because it's my job to try to save lives, even in places that seem hopeless. That's what humans do, Commander. We try. Sometimes we fail, but we always try. Thassa was quiet for a long time. I believe, she said finally, that my people have been looking for strength in the wrong places. Perhaps it is time for Valorian to reconsider what true power actually is. Your medical knowledge combined with our resources. Perhaps together we could end this war differently than it has always been fought. Sarah met the commander's black opal's eyes. I'm just a medic from Vancouver, she said. But if you're asking whether I'll help, yes. Always. In that moment, the first chapter of something much larger began. Neither of them knew it yet, but the Valorian Empire was about to discover that the most transformative power in the galaxy wasn't measured in weapons or military victories. It was measured in the number of lives saved, the number of people given a second chance, the number of soldiers who got to go home instead of dying on a distant battlefield. The war room of Valorian Command was bustling with activity when Sarah arrived for the morning briefing. 3 weeks had passed since she first touched down on the crystalline plains, and in that time, she had become something she never expected to be, essential to military operations, but not in the way Commander Thassa's people had originally imagined. The holographic display showed the current battlefront, a contested asteroid field known as the Krell Nesting Grounds. The Valorian fleet had been attempting to push the Krell back for 2 months with minimal progress. Ships were being lost. Soldiers were dying in combat and succumbing to wounds in evacuation that could have been prevented with better trauma care. The entire campaign was on the verge of collapse, not because the Valorians weren't strong enough to fight, but because they were losing soldiers faster than they could replace them. The new protocols are ready, Sarah said, pulling up her own data on the display. The assembled Valorian officers, 12 of them, each with enough combat experience to make their crystalline markings glow with faint bioluminescence, turned their attention to her. 3 weeks ago, they would have dismissed a human physician out of hand. Now they listened. We've implemented the rapid field triage system at all forward medical stations, Sarah continued. We've trained medics in wound pressure control techniques that can stop bleeding long enough for evacuation. We've established pharmaceutical supply lines that ensure antibiotics reach the front lines before soldiers develop lethal infections. Most importantly, we've changed how we think about medical evacuation. She advanced the display to show casualty recovery statistics. In the previous system, an injured soldier was evacuated if they could survive the journey. That meant we were leaving people behind who might have lived with immediate intervention. The new system sends medical teams forward to stabilize soldiers in the field, dramatically increasing survival rates. In the last 3 weeks, we've increased combat casualty survival from 62% to 93%. A murmur ran through the assembled officers. 31% seemed like a small number, but in military terms, across thousands of soldiers, it meant hundreds of lives saved. It meant soldiers returning to active duty instead of being permanently lost. It meant families on Valorian that weren't receiving death notifications. This is impossible, one of the senior officers said. His name was Targos, and he commanded a carrier group near the contested asteroid field. You are asking us to believe that a physician can change the entire dynamic of military engagement? I'm asking you to believe that soldiers fight better when they're not dying of treatable wounds, Sarah said simply. I'm asking you to understand that keeping people alive has a military value. Every soldier you save is one who can fight again. Every soldier who doesn't develop a fatal infection is one who goes back to their family. And every family member who doesn't receive a death notification is one less person consumed by grief and rage. She paused, letting that sink in. But there's more. We've been monitoring the psychological impact of improved medical care on unit cohesion. Soldiers fight harder when they know that if they fall, we'll do everything we can to save them. Morale is up 42% across units that have implemented full medical protocols. Commander Thassa stepped forward. In the past weeks, Sarah had come to recognize the subtle shifts in the commander's coloration that indicated approval. Today, Thassa's crystalline skin shimmered with deep blue and violet hues. We will implement these protocols across the entire fleet.
Dr. Chen will coordinate with medical officers at all command levels.
The Krell have not faced an enemy that improves with every casualty rather than degrades. We will show them a new definition of strength. The briefing ended, and as the officers filed out, Targos approached Sarah. The carrier commander was younger than Thassa by at least a few decades, his markings less elaborate but his demeanor precisely military. "I am transferring my command to assist with the asteroid field operations," he said. "I would appreciate your direct support in coordinating medical response for my fleet." Up until now, she had been working in the controlled environment of the command station and the medical facility. She had been safe. Going to an active combat zone was something entirely different. "Understood," she said. "I'll need to prepare my field kit and get briefed on your ship's current medical capabilities." 12 hours later, Sarah was aboard the Valorian carrier Crystallis, watching as the crew prepared for deployment to the asteroid field. The ship was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, with a complement of 8,000 crew members and soldiers. Its medical facility was extensive by Valorian standards, but Sarah found herself reorganizing almost immediately. She implemented triage protocols, reorganized the pharmaceutical stores for efficient distribution, and established communication systems that would allow forward medics to consult with her in real time during active combat. Commander Targos watched her work with an expression that seemed to blend skepticism and curiosity. "You are not from a warrior culture," he said finally. "No," Sarah agreed, not looking up from the inventory system she was restructuring. "I'm from a culture where most of our conflicts happen through laws and negotiation. We have military forces, but they're not our primary means of solving problems. And yet you come to fight our war. I come to help people who are suffering," Sarah corrected. "Whether that's in a hospital in Vancouver or a combat zone near an asteroid field, suffering is suffering. The biology is different, but the principles are the same. In our culture, we honor strength above all else. A warrior who faces an enemy without fear, who fights to victory. That is what we value. You choose to stand behind and heal. How is this strength?" Sarah finally looked up from her work. "Because it's harder. Any creature can inflict damage. Weapon systems do that. Destructive forces do that. To take someone who is broken, physically, psychologically, spiritually, and put them back together, that requires discipline, knowledge, skill, and something most warrior cultures don't value: compassion. It's the hardest strength there is because it requires you to care about the outcome more than you care about proving your power." The Valorian commander was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, his crystalline skin began to glow with deep purple. Approval, Sarah had learned. "Perhaps your culture is stronger than we believed." 3 days later, the battle began. The Corel came in waves, biomechanical insects the size of small ships, their chitinous bodies bristling with weapons, their composite metal exoskeletons reflecting weapons fire like mirrors. The Valorian fleet met them with coordinated fire patterns that Sarah could see on the tactical displays, each strike designed to maximize damage while minimizing losses. The battle was beautiful in a terrible way. The coordination, the precision, the deadly dance of beings trained in warfare. And then the casualties started coming in. Sarah had thought she was prepared. She had trained for mass casualty situations her entire career. But watching soldiers carried in with crystalline bodies shattered by plasma weapons, their internal light dimming as they bled their luminous life fluid across the medical facility, was different than any training scenario. She moved through the organized chaos of the medical bay like a dancer, assessing, directing, prioritizing. This soldier was critical but salvageable. Deep in surgery immediately. That one had minimal injuries despite appearing catastrophic. Clean them up and return to duty. This one was broken beyond repair despite his body's fight. Make him comfortable, let him die with dignity. The medics working under her watched her work with something approaching awe. She made difficult decisions instantly, never hesitating, never showing doubt, and her decisions were right. Soldiers who should have died survived. Soldiers who appeared stable but were in fact deteriorating critically were caught before their conditions became irreversible. Krell, who had come to Valorian command as part of the expanded medical team, worked beside her. The young Valorian physician had proven to be an exceptional student. He had absorbed everything Sarah could teach him in 3 weeks and had already begun making improvements to the protocols himself. Now, in the chaos of active combat, he was the bridge between human medical knowledge and Valorian biology, interpreting, adapting, ensuring that everything Sarah taught would work for his people. The casualty rate is lower than predicted, Krell said during a brief lull in the fighting. Around them, medics were cleaning equipment and restocking supplies. Outside the shielded bay, the battle continued its terrible rhythm. Better medical care means soldiers can return to duty faster, Sarah said, scrubbing plasma residue from her hands. A recovered soldier fights harder than a scared one. Morale compounds the effectiveness. The Krell do not understand this, Krell said. They fight without medical support beyond basic wound sealing. They accept casualties as inevitable. We are beginning to understand that inevitable casualties are a choice. The battle raged for 18 hours. When it ended, the Valorians had successfully repelled the Krell assault and pushed forward to claim control of the asteroid field. It was a significant victory. The first clear win in the contested region in nearly 2 years. But the casualty toll was still substantial. 300 Valorian soldiers had been killed in combat. However, of the 2,000 soldiers who had been wounded, 1,700 survived. Under the old medical protocols, that number would have been closer to 1,200. Commander Thasser arrived at the medical facility as the final surgical cases were being closed. She moved through the recovery wards, looking at soldiers whose lives had been saved by the new protocols. Her crystalline face seemed to glow with something Sarah hadn't seen before. Not quite satisfaction, but something deeper. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition that warfare itself could be transformed. You saved 500 soldiers today, Thasser said to Sarah in the command officer's private quarters later that evening. Not through weapons or strategy, but through knowledge and refusal to accept loss as inevitable. Medicine is just applied knowledge, Sarah said. She was exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. The weight of 500 lives, 500 families that would receive news of survival instead of death, pressed on her shoulders. It's recognizing patterns, understanding systems, and then using that understanding to affect outcomes. It's not special. It's just systematic. On Valorian, we would call it miraculous, Thasser said. We have fought the Krella for 200 years. In all that time, we have never gained ground because our soldiers could heal faster than we could kill the enemy. We have never been able to sustain an advance because we were always trying to replace lost soldiers instead of recover and return them. You have changed the equation of our entire war in 3 weeks. Sarah looked at the commander. What you're describing is just an application of modern medical knowledge. Human civilization learned these techniques over hundreds of years, through trial and error, through failures and successes. I'm just teaching what we already know. Perhaps, Thasser said. But the question now is, what else does your civilization know that we have not yet discovered? What other fundamental aspects of our existence might we be approaching incorrectly? If medicine could be transformed by your knowledge, what about agriculture, construction, science itself? Sarah hadn't thought about it that way. She had come to Valorian as a medic. She had expected to help wounded soldiers. She hadn't expected to potentially reshape an entire civilization's approach to knowledge and capability. I'm just one person, Sarah said quietly. I can teach what I know. But real transformation requires your people to be willing to learn, to question what they've always believed, to admit that there might be better ways to do things. That's harder than any medical protocol. Perhaps, Thasser agreed. But the fact that soldiers are returning home alive today, instead of dying from treatable wounds, that is a beginning. And I think, Dr. Chen, your civilization may be stronger than any of us realized precisely because it questions itself, because it seeks to heal rather than simply to destroy. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's role expanded. The Valorian military implemented her protocols across the entire fleet. Medical teams trained under her direct instruction, and most importantly, the number of Valorian soldiers dying from preventable causes dropped to nearly zero. The war was far from over, but the dynamic had shifted. Now, the Valorians were winning not because they were stronger fighters, but because they were stronger survivors. And back on Valorian's crystalline plains, in the medical facilities and in the hearts of families who received living soldiers instead of death notifications, something profound was beginning to change. An entire civilization was learning that the greatest strength wasn't the ability to destroy enemies. It was the commitment to preserve and protect the lives of your own people. It was a lesson that Sarah had tried to teach through her medical work, but she was beginning to realize it was taking root in ways that extended far beyond the hospital wards. 6 months into Sarah Chen's tenure on Valorian, the entire trajectory of the war with the Krell had shifted in ways that went far beyond military metrics. The casualty rates continued to plummet. Medical facilities across the Valorian fleet had become centers of learning and innovation. Young Valorian physicians like Krell were not just implementing Sarah's techniques, they were improving them, creating hybrid approaches that combined human medical knowledge with uniquely Valorian biological understanding. But the most profound change was societal. For the first time in Valorian history, soldiers were going home to their families, not in small numbers, not as exceptional cases. By the hundreds, then by the thousands, they arrived back on Valorian's surface with their crystalline bodies healed, their internal luminescence restored, ready to resume civilian life. Families that had accepted their loss were suddenly reunited. Children who had grown up knowing they would never meet their fathers embraced parents who were supposed to be dead. The political ramifications were impossible to ignore. Sarah stood in the observation gallery overlooking the Grand Assembly of Valorian, watching as the most influential leaders of the civilization gathered. The chamber was magnificent, a vast crystalline structure that caught light from the double sun and refracted it into rainbow patterns across the walls. The assembled leaders represented every major faction of Valorian society: the military command, the industrial collective, the academic institution, the regional governors, and the Council of Ancients, the eldest members of society whose wisdom was traditionally respected in all major decisions. Beside Sarah stood Commander Thassa, resplendent in formal ceremonial armor that marked her status as the primary architect of the new military strategy. Krell was there as well, along with a dozen other Valorian physicians who had become the face of the medical revolution. They will argue, Thassa said quietly. There are those who believe that the old ways, strength through martial prowess, should remain our civilization's primary value. They fear that by emphasizing preservation over conquest, we lose what makes us Valorian. Change is always frightening, Sarah said. She had learned this lesson many times over her career. In hospitals across human civilization, people feared what they didn't understand. They feared losing identity, feared becoming something other than what they had always been. But change isn't loss, it's evolution. The assembly came to order with a harmonic tone, the crystalline structures of the chamber amplifying the ancient call to attention. The High Assembly Master, an ancient Valorian named Kelesh, whose crystalline body had become almost clear with age, took the central platform. We gather, Kelesh began, his voice like the creaking of ancient stone, to discuss a matter that strikes at the very heart of Valorian identity. The human physician has introduced practices that challenge fundamental aspects of our culture. The military command reports overwhelming success with these new medical protocols, but success in warfare is not the only measure of a civilization's health. A faction leader named Vorzax rose from his seat. His markings were aggressive, sharp angles, deep colors that suggested a confrontational nature. I oppose this direction. For 200 years, we have defined ourselves through strength and capability. We have taught our young that honor comes through victory in battle, that a Valorian's worth is determined by their ability to face adversity and overcome it. Now we are told that we should save those who would have died, preventing them from achieving the honor of a warrior's death. This is weakness, not strength. Sarah felt the temperature in the chamber drop. The Valoronians around her stiffened. This was not academic debate. This was a fundamental challenge to the new direction. An older Valorian physician named Tesrol rose from the medical faction. The doctor's teachings preserve strength. A soldier healed is a soldier who can fight again. The Corel do not honor fallen soldiers. They replace them with biomechanical drones. We preserve our warriors. We return them to their families. How is that weak? Because it prioritizes individual survival over collective honor, Vorzak shot back. It suggests that living is more important than dying with purpose. Sarah found herself standing before she consciously decided to move. The chamber fell silent. A human speaking in the Grand Assembly was unprecedented. She didn't have official standing or the right to participate in debate. But the ancient protocols of the assembly allowed for witnesses to speak if recognized by the High Assembly Master. Kellish nodded slightly, granting her the floor. "I'm not going to tell you that your old ways were wrong," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, carrying through the chamber. "I come from a human society that learned through our own painful history that honor in death and strength through warfare are deeply meaningful concepts. They shaped human civilization. They defined us for thousands of years. But we learned something else too. We learned that what matters most is not how we die, but how we live. And what makes life worth living is not just ourselves, but the people we love and who love us." She paused, looking around the chamber. "The soldiers you heal don't go home dishonored. They go home alive. They hold their children. They teach them. They contribute to society in ways that matter. They become teachers, builders, innovators. They become fathers and mothers and grandparents. That's not weakness. That's legacy. That's immortality, not in how you die, but in how you continue to influence the world after you survive." Vorzax rose again. "This is human sentiment. We are not humans. We are Valorians. We do not fear death the way your species does." "No," Sarah agreed. "You don't. You've built an entire culture that accepts death as part of existence. But accepting death and choosing preventable death are different things. I'm not asking you to stop being warriors. I'm asking you to be smart warriors. Warriors who take every advantage available to survive, to return home, to continue fighting for what matters. That's not weakness. That's tactical superiority." The debate continued for hours. Vorzax presented arguments steeped in Valorian cultural tradition. Medical experts presented data showing improved soldier capability and morale. Military commanders explained how medical advancement had translated into tactical advantages. Economists showed how recovered soldiers meant reduced training costs and increased productivity. Philosophers debated the nature of strength and honor. And through it all, Sarah watched the crystalline faces of the assembled Valorians, trying to read the subtle color changes that indicated approval or disapproval. The chamber was divided, she could see. This was a real question for Valorian society, not a settled matter. When the debate finally came to a close, the High Assembly Master called for a formal vote. On the primary question, whether to continue and expand the medical advancement protocols, the margin was surprisingly clear. 62% in favor, 38% opposed. A decisive victory, but not a unanimous one. That night, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, looking out at Valorian's landscape under the light of its double sun beginning to set. She thought about the 38% who had voted against the medical advancement. They weren't evil. They weren't opposed to saving lives out of cruelty. They were frightened. They saw their entire civilization's foundation being questioned, and they were trying to hold on to something familiar. A message arrived on her personal comm device. It was from Krell, asking her to come to the medical facility. Something had happened. Sarah arrived to find the facility in controlled chaos. A transport vessel had just landed carrying 15 Krell prisoners, something almost unheard of in Valorian military operations. Krell soldiers were almost never captured alive. They fought to the death, their biomechanical exoskeletons designed to self-destruct rather than be taken prisoner. These 15 had survived. They were wounded, clearly in pain, their metallic and organic parts damaged from whatever combat had resulted in their capture. The tactical command was uncertain what to do with them, Krell explained. His coloration was uncertain, colors shifting as he struggled with the decision facing him. "We do not have protocols for Krell prisoners," the traditional response would be. He trailed off, but Sarah understood. Execution was the traditional response. Sarah moved toward the holding area where the Krell were being kept. She wasn't afraid, though she should have been. These were the enemy. These creatures had killed Valorian soldiers. They had pursued a war of extermination across multiple star systems. But they were also wounded. They were suffering, and they were her patients. "We treat them," Sarah said simply. "They are our enemies," a Valorian soldier objected. "They have killed our people. Why would we waste medical resources on them?"
Because if we're going to claim that medical knowledge represents a higher form of strength, then we can't apply it selectively,
Sarah said. "We can't say we value preservation of life and then refuse to preserve lives because those lives belong to creatures we're fighting. Either we believe in the principle, or we don't." she began examining the Corel prisoners. They were different from human or Valorian biology, with exoskeletons, multiple limbs, and a completely different organizational structure. But underneath the different biology, underneath the fact that they were the enemy, they were living things in pain. Sarah worked through the night, treating infections, setting broken carapace sections, administering pain management. The Corel didn't resist. Some of them seemed almost confused by the care being given to them by a member of the enemy species. By dawn, all 15 Krill prisoners had stabilized. None had died. Several would recover fully. Word of what had happened spread through Valorian faster than Sarah could have imagined. The Council of Ancients called for an emergency session. News channels broadcast images of Sarah treating Corel soldiers. The reactions were polarized and intense. Some Valorians saw it as evidence of her wisdom, that healing transcended the boundaries of conflict. Others saw it as betrayal, weakness, and a violation of everything Valorian civilization stood for. Vorzax led the charge against her, arguing to the assembly that Sarah had overstepped her authority, that she was corrupting Valorian military values, that she had demonstrated her alien nature by refusing to recognize the Corel as enemies worthy of destruction rather than medical care. Sarah did not defend herself. Instead, 3 days later, something unexpected happened. One of the recovered Krell prisoners, a biomechanical insectoid creature with metallic blue carapace and compound eyes that seemed to hold an almost human intelligence, asked to speak to the assembly. Through translation devices, the Corel addressed the gathered leaders of Valorian. Its name was translated as Shardpulse. Among your species, I expected execution. Instead, I received care from the human physician and her Valorian colleagues. I was healed. I was given pain medication. I was treated as though my life mattered. The chamber was completely silent. A Krell speaking to the Valorian assembly was unprecedented. The Krell swarm has fought your civilization for 200 years. Shardpulse continued. We have pursued your destruction. We have seen you only as enemies to be eliminated. But I have learned something. In the medical facility of your civilization, I have learned that we are not so different as we believed. That pain means the same to a Krell as it does to a Valorian. That fear of death is universal. But the desire to recover and return to one's home transcends species boundaries. Shardpulse paused. The human physician has demonstrated something that neither Valorian nor Corel civilization has truly understood. Strength is not the ability to destroy. Strength is the ability to preserve, to create, to heal. My people have pursued a war of extermination for centuries because we believed that strength came through total dominance. The physician showed me differently. What are you saying? The High Assembly Master asked. I am saying, Shardpulse said, that I wish to communicate with my people. The human physician has shown me that a different path exists. A path where conflict is not the only solution. A path where lives are valued regardless of origin. I do not know if my people will listen. But I believe the attempt must be made, and I believe it must be made because the Valorians, in choosing to heal an enemy, have demonstrated true strength, the strength to refuse to participate in endless violence. The chamber erupted. Vorzax was on his feet screaming about betrayal and conspiracy. Medical officers were shouting about the implications. Military commanders were calculating strategy, but through it all, Sarah could see something shift in the crystalline faces of the ancients. The oldest members of Valorian society, the ones who had seen centuries of war and understood its true cost, were nodding. Not in agreement necessarily, but in recognition that something fundamental had changed. 3 months later, Shardpulse returned to the Valorian assembly with representatives from the Krell collective. They came seeking not battle, but negotiation. The war that had lasted 200 years was not immediately ended. Ancient conflicts do not resolve overnight, but a ceasefire was established. A framework for peace talks was created. Human negotiators arrived from Earth to facilitate discussions. Earth's government, learning of Sarah's success, sent additional medical professionals, engineers, and educators to assist in the cultural and technological exchange. But Sarah remained on Valorian. In the medical facility where she had first arrived as an unknown physician, she worked alongside Krell and the other Valorian medical professionals, training the next generation of healers. She established a clinic where both Valorian and Krell patients received care. She wrote papers detailing human medical advancement and its application to non-human biology. And most importantly, she changed the fundamental understanding of what strength meant to an entire civilization. On the evening of her one-year anniversary on Valorian, Commander Thassa came to find her. The commander's crystalline skin glowed with colors of deep contentment. Purples and blues that Sarah had learned meant peace. "The council has voted unanimously," Thassa said. "There are no longer those who oppose the medical advancement. Even Vorzax has been forced to concede the point. A soldier who survives and returns to society is a soldier who contributes to that society. Strength that creates is stronger than strength that merely destroys." "What changed his mind?" Sarah asked, curious about the transformation of the faction leader who had so violently opposed her presence. "Tidab! His grandson was wounded in the first Krell engagement after peace talks began," Thassa said. "Your medical protocols saved the boy's life. A grandson he will now know. A grandson who will carry his legacy forward. He told me he finally understood what you meant about immortality through legacy rather than through warrior deaths." Dad Sarah smiled. That was always how change happened in human culture too. People believed in principles until those principles affected their own families. Then suddenly, the principles became real. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," Thassa said, "we continue forward. We build a society that values preservation as much as we value courage. We create technologies that heal as well as we created weapons that destroy. And we show the galaxy that humanity's greatest strength is not that it produces warriors, but that it produces healers. We show them that the medic is stronger than the weapon. That compassion is more powerful than conquest." Sarah looked out at Valorian's landscape, at the crystalline plains that caught and scattered the light of the double sun. Somewhere out there, soldiers were healing in medical facilities. Scientists were studying human medical texts, translating them, improving them. Children were being born to parents who had been saved from death by medical intervention. An entire civilization was being rewritten by the simple principle that every life mattered, and it all had happened because one woman from Vancouver had packed her medical kit and chosen to help people who needed help, regardless of where they came from or what weapons they carried. "You know," Sarah said to Thassa, "when I arrived here, I thought I was just a medic. I thought I would treat some wounded soldiers and go home. I didn't expect to change an entire civilization." "Neither did we," Thassa said. "But perhaps that is the true nature of healing. It is not just the cure of individual diseases or injuries. It is the cure of entire societies sick with the belief that destruction is strength. You have healed us of that sickness, Dr. Chen. And in healing us, you have taught us that the greatest power in any civilization is not the power to destroy, but the power to save. Not the power to conquer, but the power to create. Not the power to end lives, but the power to change them." As the sun set across Valorian's crystalline plains, painting the landscape in shades of amber and gold, Sarah Chen, medic from Vancouver, harbinger of a revolution in thinking, allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, one person really could change everything, not through weapons or military might, not through superiority of force or dominance of power, but through something far more enduring. The simple refusal to let suffering exist when you possess the knowledge to ease it. The understanding that healing was not weakness, but the strongest thing a civilization could choose to be. The Valorians had expected warriors. Instead, they had found something they needed far more. They had found the truth that humanity had learned through centuries of progress. That civilization's greatest achievement was not its ability to wage war, but its commitment to preserve life. And in learning that truth from a human medic, they had discovered their own strength in ways their martial culture never could have imagined.